There are a lot of things to hate about the modern games industry and game studios in general, but personally to me, one of the most soul-crushing aspects of the current state of the industry is just watching your favorite franchises and once beloved companies burn to the ground, becoming a shadow of their former selves and abandoning everything that made them great in the first place. I think there's a lot of studios that encapsulate this phenomenon in the games industry, especially today, but I'm going to be focusing on how it relates to Bungie today, specifically with their recent release of Marathon. Now, Marathon came out a little over a month ago, and I did play it a fair bit. I think I have like 10 hours in it across PlayStation and Steam and the server slam. And to be honest, I feel like that gave me a good feel for the game and let me form a pretty solid opinion on it. I know I haven't gotten to the end game things like the cryo chamber or whatever it's called. And honestly, I'm not sure that I'll ever get to it just based on how hardcore it seems. Much respect to those who can. I just think those days of gaming are behind me where I can hardcore grind a endgame raid all night. But yeah, like I said, Marathon came out a little over a month ago. I've been playing it a little bit here and there. I've kind of dropped off once I felt I formed a pretty solid opinion on the game. And now that we're kind of starting to see the player base settle around certain numbers and we have a little bit more concrete sales data and information on the budget of Marathon, I think it's more important than ever to take a look at Bungie and what their future holds. Because I grew up loving Bungie. They made my favorite shooter franchise of all time and one of my favorite sci-fi franchises of all time in Halo, and by now everyone is well aware of how they revolutionized FPS games, especially when it came to playing them on console. But it's important to remember that the Bungie of old is not the same Bungie we have today. Many of the people who made Halo great and even Destiny to some degree are no longer at Bungie. Now, people will dispute this by trying to cite like a handful of employees who happen to work on a few Halo games who are still at Bungie, but it's kind of a disingenuous argument because they know that the people making the decisions for the most part are no longer the same people who were in charge when Halo was their focus. Like, yeah, I'm sure there's still a few people who have been there since the beginning, but it is very clear that the vision of the studio has changed and most of the original staff who made Bungie great are no longer there. And I think that's perfectly clear when you look at not only the budget and development process for Marathon, but also how it's performing on the market. So Marathon, according to various sources, reportedly had a budget over 200 million, likely over 250 million, and it's important to note that this covers only the development of the game up until launch. It does not cover the ongoing live service costs of servers, maintenance, anti-cheat, and additional content. It also does not cover the marketing budget for the game. So $200 million at best was spent on the development of this game. And I just want you to keep those numbers in mind as we look at the player charts for the game and official sales data. If you take a look at the Steam charts, Marathon has an average 24-hour peak of about 20 to 25,000 players, and it had an all-time peak of 88,000 players. Now, this isn't terrible when you consider that extraction shooters are extremely niche in today's market. Even if you look at the most popular ones like Escape from Tarkov, their numbers are pretty similar. It is important to note that Tarkov does not have a $250+ million development budget, and so these numbers may be considered more successful to that development team. But you might be saying, oh, that's just on Steam. People are probably playing more on PlayStation, which is what a lot of people were saying when the player count discussion was happening, as it does with many modern games. But now we have data from analysts saying that Steam accounted for the majority of sales of Marathon, estimating it to be 70 to 80%. So when you take that into consideration, it's really impossible to suggest that Marathon may have broken even. Taking a look at the analyst estimates for this game, which have been cross-verified as being close to Bungie's internal metrics, the worldwide sales for Marathon are estimated to be around 1.2 million copies. So that puts the game at $55 million gross revenue, which is, if we're generous, about a fifth of its development budget. Again, not taking into consideration all of the post-launch costs that are going to accrue with maintaining a live service game. Steam accounted for the majority of those sales with estimates between 70 and 80% and much lower estimates on PlayStation and Xbox. And this is a story that is all too common in the games industry, that these studios and publishers spend enormous amounts of money and development time on these live service games that will never be able to recoup their development costs. The gap between the money Marathon has made and the money it needs to make just to break even before you consider any post-launch support costs is still $200 million. That is a net loss of $200 million for Sony. And when you play Marathon, it is very hard to justify that budget just by looking at the game. This is a multiplayer only game with a very limited selection of content. Also a game that stole many of its art assets, leading to a huge controversy when it was supposed to launch last year. So you can't even tell me that the budget went to the art direction of the game because most of that was stolen. It's just absolutely crazy to me in the Jim Ryan / Herman Hulst era of PlayStation, the sheer number of live service failures we have seen. You know, I really don't like being an armchair analyst or anything, but anyone could have told you that an extraction shooter making that much money was going to be a very difficult task, if not impossible. If you look at similar games on the market, this is pretty much where they peak, except they know how to scale their development, so they don't have a deficit that equates to hundreds of millions of dollars. And all of this follows a series of struggles for Bungie. Like I said, even if you ignore the stolen art controversy from last year, which by the way is not a new issue for Bungie, they have been caught stealing art countless times. It really feels like Bungie has been on the decline ever since they let go of Halo. They did have some highs and lows with Destiny, I will give them that. I did enjoy certain parts of those games, but I just don't think Marathon has the staying power that Destiny had for so long, or that Halo continues to have today, even in spite of 343's mishandling of the franchise. I don't think Marathon is a terrible game. It has that trademark gameplay that Bungie is known for, that smooth first-person shooting experience, but there's just not enough there for that game to be elevated to even the same heights as Destiny, in my opinion. Bungie and Sony have come out saying that there are no plans to scale back or shut down Marathon, speaking in reference to what has happened with many live service games recently like Concord and Highguard. They're trying to be reassuring here that they're continuing to work on future seasons and they view this as a long-term bet of some sort. But even from that standpoint, it's really hard to see how Marathon is ever going to even recoup its development cost and then make up for the recurring cost of running the game. We've seen time and time again that just because a developer says a game is going to stay online, that does not mean it is true. A lot of times that is kind of a Hail Mary for them trying to get last-minute player numbers up before inevitably shutting it down. We saw that with Highguard, who came out with a full-year roadmap before they shut the game down, and Wildlight Entertainment is just non-existent anymore. Personally, I just think these live service games need to get a strong hold on their development pipeline and their budgets, because there's just no reason that a game like Marathon needs to cost as much as something that's a lot more cinematic and narrative driven in nature. At least with those games I can understand where the budgets get kind of bloated, but I genuinely don't even know where the money that was put into Marathon went. I don't know, man. It's just really heartbreaking to see what has happened to what was formerly one of my favorite game studios of all time. But like I said, this is just kind of the state of the industry. As the Act Man would say, modern gaming, am I right? But I don't know, that's just my thoughts on the Marathon situation. Personally, I do not see this game sticking around for long. I just don't see why Sony would continue to burn money on this game when it is very clearly never going to recoup its cost. I think it would just be smarter to put Bungie on something else, you know, something that is going to actually make them money and not burn hundreds of millions of dollars, but what do I know? And I do want to throw this on the end here just in case anyone is watching and thinks I absolutely hate Marathon. Again, I don't think it is a terrible game. I do think the gameplay foundation is really good. I just personally don't find it that interesting. I don't think the world is that exciting. I don't think there's any real depth to the game, and unless you're a hardcore player trying to do the endgame content, I just don't really see the appeal of this take on an extraction shooter. It's not the worst thing ever made, it's just not for me, and very clearly not for a lot of other people if we're going off of the player counts. But I do want to hear from you guys what you think about Marathon. Do you think this will be another Highguard and Concord situation where the devs promise the world and then they shut the game down in 2 weeks, or do you think Marathon is going to stick around a little longer? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give me a like and subscribe for more content, and let me know what you want to see more of. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps me plan new videos, you know, make sure I'm talking about the things you guys want to hear about. And with all of that said, I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys.